Welcome. Reflecting on the Gospel from Easter Sunday from Mark. When the Sabbath was over, Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James, and Salome bought spices so that they might go to anoint Jesus' body. Very early on the first day of the week, just after sunrise, they were on their way to the tomb, and they asked each other, "Who'll roll the stone away from the entrance to the tomb?" But when they looked up, they saw that the stone, which was very large, had been rolled away. As they entered the tomb, they saw a young man dressed in a white robe sitting on the right side, and they were alarmed. "Don't be alarmed," he said. "You're looking for Jesus the Nazarene who was crucified. He's risen. He's not here. See the place where they laid him. But go, tell his disciples and Peter he's going ahead of you into Galilee. There you'll see him, just as he told you." Trembling and bewildered, the women went out and fled from the tomb. They said nothing to anyone because they were afraid. This is the Gospel of the Lord, and that's a very weird ending of the Gospel of Mark. And in fact, this ending was so confronting, they said nothing to anyone because they were afraid, that you can see, if you look at your Bibles, that there'll be footnotes saying, well, here's a possible later ending. So people tried to smooth it out. They couldn't cope with this abrupt, they said nothing to anyone because they were afraid. So, being slightly facetious, here's a message from Easter, from the Gospel of Mark. Move on. Nothing to see here. That's what the young man said to the women. And of course, it's a movie meme, and you might have seen lines like that in all sorts of things. But move on, nothing to see here, when it applies to Easter, is far more than a Jedi mind trick. So let's look at those women. They're the first witnesses of the empty tomb, the first ones to hear the announcement of the resurrection, and they're the first ones charged with preaching the resurrection. And they're trembling, bewildered, and afraid. And that's okay. Think of their emotional journey. So they're on Good Friday, they've seen all their hopes and dreams about Jesus crash right down to nothing. And they are the ones who've hung in there and watched him go through that horrific experience. Arrested, tortured, and then crucified, and finally dying. But then to have the word that, oh, Jesus is alive, it's like their system's overloaded. It's too much on top of their shattered hopes. Of course, they're trembling, bewildered, and afraid. And along with that is that, oh, maybe this message is true, but they're afraid to believe it because then everything changes. Mark was writing to Christians in Rome, and it was the time of the Emperor Nero. And Nero had wanted to do a massive rebuild in Rome, but of course everyone's properties are in the way of Nero's grand scheme, and there happens to be this huge 5-day fire which burns most of ancient Rome. So Nero needs a scapegoat. And the Jewish population, because they'd been fighting between Christians, Jews and non-Christian Jews, they'd been expelled earlier, they'd come back a few years before. They lived in the worst area, which was swampy area the other side of the river. Of course, being a swampy area, their properties didn't burn. So there's a convenient scapegoat. Nero comes in, you Jews lit the fire. And the Jews say, oh, don't blame us. It's those Christians among us that did it. And so the soldiers come in. Right, we're arresting you from your family unless you can give us the names of some Christian Jews. And so there they are, trembling, bewildered, afraid. How do we deal with this in the light of the resurrection? And of course, for all of us, can our fears and the things that have gone badly wrong, could they be the prelude to something new and better and maybe even wonderful? And the message is, move along, nothing to see here. You've got to go back to Galilee. Now, Galilee is like a 3-hour bus journey north of Jerusalem. And it's not just simple to get there. So that's a lot of days walking. Who knows? more than a week, possibly. Back to Galilee, back to where Jesus began his ministry, but now you're going to see it in a new way. Except that your old lifestyles and your old ways of living are no longer going to work in the light of the empty tomb and the resurrection and the risen Christ who will appear to you. And elsewhere in the other Gospels, we hear about Peter and the others just not knowing what to do. What do we do with this resurrection? I'm going fishing. Here's the remains of an actual fishing boat from the time of Jesus. Big, huge thing. Would easily sit more than 12 people. So Peter's going to go fishing, but it's not going to work. The poet T.S. Eliot, who's a friend of C.S. Lewis and Tolkien, said, "We shall not cease from exploration, and the end of all our exploring will be to arrive where we started and know the place for the first time." So the disciples are directed back to Galilee, and they've got to work through what they did. They saw Jesus doing amazing miracles, overcoming the kingdom of Satan, healing people, casting out unclean spirits. Now they've got to process and learn that it's a crucified Messiah who did this. Life isn't just one glorious moment of ascent and success after another. There's crucifixion, there's dying to ourselves, there's rising to new life. And maybe as we go back through our own life stories, we reprocess them in the light of that pattern, dying, rising to new life. Go tell the disciples and Peter. Beautiful words, because Peter was the one who had denied Jesus. He'd stood up and said, "I'm going to be so amazingly strong, and here I am, I'm going to..." And the reality was he denied Jesus 3 times before the rooster crowed. Brass sculptures from the possible literal site in Jerusalem where Peter denied Jesus. And Jesus says, by adding, "And Peter, I want to see you." Okay, so Peter can go knowing, Jesus still wants to see me. I don't know what that meeting's going to be like, but he wants to see me. And there was stuff to work through, and you can read about that in the Gospel of John. And Jesus says, "Do you love me?" Peter says, "Yeah, but it's a pretty human, fallible love." And Jesus accepts that. There's that dialogue, "Do you love me?" 3 times. Move on, nothing to see here. Is that all the Easter message is? It's about everything. We've got to learn to see everything in our whole life and the life of others in the light and promise of the resurrection. The disciples didn't get it exactly right. And that's, I think, a sort of comfort for us because we don't get it exactly right. So the women and Peter, they certainly didn't get this bit right. The women, trembling and afraid, said nothing to anyone, but the message still got out. And Peter, that restoration before he's able to go and share the message of the resurrection. And there's a powerful thing. The message gets out whether we get it right in our telling or not. There's a much deeper reality now coursing through the whole of creation. The deeper reality is resurrection, new life coming from what is dead and destroyed. And my life, it's no longer all about me and my story. There's God's story interwoven and working through mine. So there's the Easter promise. It's for the current people in Israel on all sides of that horrific conflict. It's for all of us who maybe are not currently experiencing any joy. Crucified Messiah still wins. And there's a promise. In the midst of life, there is always life and there's always love. May that be your lived experience this Easter.